Hello, and welcome to the ACEDS webinar channel. My name is Mary Mack. I'm the Executive Director of ACEDS, the Association of Certified eDiscovery Specialists. And we have a very special webinar for you today as part of our Legal Tech Jumpstart, and we're getting quick peeks from some of our wonderful affiliates of the technology and some of the themes that they'll be talking about at Legal Tech, and this is an opportunity for you in the comfort of your own home or office to get a glimpse of what will be presented at Legal Tech and without having to look over people's shoulders. So we definitely enjoy that, and we're very pleased to have folks here. Those of you who attend this week, so attending this one and the next two, we've got two more. You attend all three, you will be entered into a drawing for a SEDS package, and we will be announcing the winners at the end of the week. Look for us at Legal Tech. We're in booth 1601. On the ACEDS website, we've got all of our events listed. We'd love to see you there. So when we talk about what we're going to see today, we're going to be talking about cost-effective, cloud-based data collection. For reals is what I understand. And we have two presenters here who are totally seasoned in the art and science of getting this data, not only getting it, but getting it into court. So David Greedham from Ricoh, he is the VP of Sales and Operations for Ricoh USA's eDiscovery practice. And prior to that, he had HSSK Forensic, which was acquired by Ricoh. So David is somebody who's able to be entrepreneurial and then also scale with that larger organization like Ricoh. He has an ASCLD lab, that's the American Society of Crime Lab Directors, certified lab for his forensics activities. He's been both a testifying expert and a consulting expert in computer forensics. He's part of the Forensics Expert Witness Association. And one of the things that he did is he patented something called Remlox. And he's both the inventor and developer of Remlox. It's a remote collection tool. He was honored by Ricoh in Japan for that patent. It was the first from North America to be so honored. He has with him one of his valued colleagues. Her name is Jean Lewis. She is the principal in Cremon and Graham. She has 25 years of trying complex cases, not just from one side, not just the defense, but also the plaintiff side. She's the leader in their commercial litigation group. She's handled cases like professional liability. I mean, think about it. Technical competence, professional liability, bankruptcy, class actions, business disputes. She's worked with directors and officers, litigation, local governments, arbitration, and internal investigation. Besides her extensive civil litigation experience, she also was a public defender in California and an advocate for children, so handled some criminal things, although she says now her practice is limited to the civil. It's always good when you're talking collection to have that background in criminal. So we're absolutely delighted to have both of you here. They would love your questions, so if you put your questions in the Q&A panel, if it's right what we're talking about, I'll interrupt and ask. Otherwise, we'll save it to the end. And at the end, we'll have some news about where you can find Ricoh, both before Legal Tech and after, because there will be a Twitter chat on Friday at noon Eastern. We'll give you all the details at the end of the session. So, David, take it away.
Mary, thank you. It's always a pleasure to talk to the ACEDS community, and I think, as everybody knows, I'm a big supporter of ACEDS, so I appreciate this opportunity. So we're going to do this presentation, and we'd really talk about the issue and the problem and what happened with Remlox and how Remlox came around. Jean is going to talk about really a case study where There's some fantastic litigating going on, and Remlox was certainly part of it. But really talking more about her strategy and how they had a significant win using Remlox as a collection tool, but much more than that. So let's start with some background. We talk about computer forensics, and there's all sorts of descriptions out there. But the description that I'm particularly interested in is this one, and we talk about the goal of computer forensics is to collect and examine digital media. And we're going to talk very much specifically today from a collection point of view as the element of computer forensics. So a little bit of background. Computer forensics and specifically data collections really started a long time ago. It was over 25 years ago. I had the benefit of being in the UK at the time when really computer forensics was getting formed, when people were talking about standards of how you could validate something that was collected. And that's been about 25 years ago now. So we have processes in place. Hash value matching, exact replicas, documentation to support it, as you would expect in really any forensic science. There's a validation process, tried and tested, written around standard operating procedures. And that was fine. Federal Rules of Civil Procedure got amended in December 2006, and there was more focus on collecting metadata to be preserved. And I think previous to that, there'd been, it wasn't the Wild West, but there was certainly varying standards, and courts would make a decision on whether this collection was acceptable or not. I think also at the same time, more rich metadata became available from applications, and the metadata became more important. And it's really hard to think back before this, right? But it was people copied and pasted and copied things onto DVDs or CDs and sent them off, and metadata was often not preserved, and if it was often ruined in the process. It was considered, the self-collection side of it was a risk, and it was considered expensive to have a forensics person to come on site and collect. At the same time, there was a big push to, geo workers, people working from home for 1 day a week, 1 day a month, and 2 days a week, and now some people work from home all the time, full time. So this was happening at the same time. So if you imagine you had perhaps some matter where you had to collect the data from 20 people, maybe there were salespeople, and they all worked from home, there was certainly some challenges there. There's some high cost. It would take time. You would have to, some significant logistical challenges. At the time, we just thought there had to be a better way of doing this. How do you capture a full forensic image of a computer without having to go to somebody's house, without having to, turn up an office and sit there all day and for the client to have some costs? But the importance of that full forensic image was critical because the metadata implications that the federal rules amendments dictated were certainly a factor. I remember, 15 years ago maybe, I went to Brazil to do a data collection of 4 laptops, and I was there for nearly 2 weeks because of logistical issues. Somebody didn't turn up, they bought the wrong laptop, and they had a national holiday. Really significant challenges there. So we just thought there'd have to be a better way. And before we got into that better way, I think one of the things that we want to keep in mind is these are the core principles that were in place, the pillars, if you like, of what you needed when you created a collection. So when we had people go to a client's location and make forensic images, these are the things that were considered. And these are the things that had to be adhered to make sure that any evidence gathered could be authenticated, and it could be presented in a legal environment and be accepted as fact. So we have to talk about really what is a forensic image. Well, you can make a forensic image of anything, right? A file, half a file, a folder, parts of an iPhone, whatever it is. But we're talking specifically with Remlox at this stage about a full forensic image. And that's really an acquisition of a piece of media rather than an operating system or some files. And at the time, why would you do a full forensic image? Well, it allowed you to do all sorts of things, spoliation assessments, and Gene's going to talk about that in a little while. It provided the ability to recover deleted files if they were recoverable. It meant you could return to the data set if you just collected Office documents, and then later on you realized you should have collected PDFs, you would have had to go back to it. But, and as the slide says, it's really the start. It's the starting point for any forensic analysis. So just on the naming side, full forensic image is important. Going to collections in 2006, and how was it done? Before we had some remote options, this is how it was done. It was on-site collections. You would arrange for an expert to go on site with some specialized equipment, and it was quite expensive, often travel time, certainly billed by the hour. In some cases, people did send evidence to labs, and we'll touch on that, but frankly, that wasn't very, very popular. Lab-based collections, people worried about shipping evidence, for one. They're worried about damaging, and we've certainly seen some pretty heavily damaged evidence arrive into our lab, and certainly not the ideal way of doing it, certainly at that time. But they were really the only significant choices around. So I give you that background to tell you why we actually developed Remlox. So Remlox is a tool that comes on an encrypted hard drive. It's an application that sits on an encrypted hard drive, and it's shipped to a client using just regular couriers, and with it comes some return packaging, and it makes a full forensic image as if a forensic expert was on site doing this image. And the validation processes are the same. So it creates a complete physical hard drive image. Again, if you remember what a full forensic image is, it's the image of a piece of media, not necessarily, you're not worried about the zeros and ones, in fact, or the files are on there. It's actually validating that the replication was from a piece of media. It ran from within Windows. The data was acquired was compliant with lots of regulations, and the encryption used on these drives is 256-bit encryption. And when it was shipped from our lab, it was configured for that custodian, and return shipping went with it. So the custodian would get it. They would plug it in. As you can see from the graphics, there's a keypad, and the keypad would be transmitted them separately. And they would defeat the encryption by putting the details in the keypads, and then that would start the process. That would start making a full forensic image as if I or one of my team were there actually doing the same thing. And when it completed, it would validate, they would unplug it, it would go back into a new packaging and would ship back to our forensics lab. And that was kind of at the time cutting edge. People were like, oh my gosh, remote collections? I just don't know if we can do that. We use core technology underneath this that was public domain core technology, and which had been validated many, many, many times by different organizations, including the DOJ and NIST. So how has that been so far? It's been used in 37 countries, covering most of the continents. We're still looking for an opportunity to use it in Antarctica. It's been used in response to government matters. It's been unique, and it's been an effective solution. We've collected successfully tens of thousands of terabytes. Now, of course, you look to today, and there's several options, but Remlox was that first option, and it almost changed our mindset, our culture about how we do collections. It was the original, and as I think Mary mentioned earlier, it has several U.S. patents which validate that. And it's always nice to be named by a court, right? So there's a couple of examples of a couple of court cases there where it was mandated that Remlox was the tool to be used because of its practicality, because of the cost sensitivity to the case, because there was geographic issues, and what have you. So that's really the background to Remlox as a product. I think Jean's going to talk about a case where she used Remlox as part of a strategy in a matter that she had great success with. And then I'll come back and we'll talk about Remlox Cloud, which is our new offering that we're releasing at Legal Tech. So Jean, I'll pass that to you.
Thanks, David. So as David said, I and my partner, Dave Schuster, were fortunate to represent a bankruptcy trustee in Maryland. we had a Maryland bankruptcy case where a debtor who had a long history of litigation decided to escape a creditor who was closing in on him by filing for bankruptcy protection, or at least he thought he was getting protection of some sort. He had previously run a mortgage rescue scheme that preyed on elderly people and recent immigrants. The scam was he'd come in, and if they were behind on a payment, say that he would give them a loan to get them current on their mortgage, when in effect what he was really doing is having their houses signed over to him. And he was ultimately sued by the AARP, and many people got judgments against him, but none were able to collect on it because he was really quite good at concealing assets. He had an estranged wife who was still married to him to protect their property that was held in a tenancy by entireties. She was a disbarred attorney. And so as you can imagine, we were really interested in electronic evidence. So our role in particular was to serve as special litigation counsel for the Chapter 11 trustee, and we were tasked with bringing claims against Mr. Abel, who was the debtor, and a bunch of people who were working with him to conceal assets, and lots of LLCs where he was either the sole member or with his ex-wife, now ex-wife, the sole member. And our theory was a bankruptcy debtor is obligated to disclose all assets so that the court can marshal their assets and figure out how creditors are going to be paid. But what this guy was doing was concealing his assets from the bankruptcy estate by titling them in other people's names, in LLC's names, when in fact the assets really did belong to him. So we bit off a lot in trying to prove that things that were titled in others' names were really his. So we filed a complaint. Because this was bankruptcy case, it was the discovery procedure was a little bit different. I don't know if there are people on the call who have bankruptcy experience, but the trustee has the ability to get subpoenas from the bankruptcy court on motion before discovery actually begins in any adversary proceeding. And in our case, 2004 exams had been requested from the bankruptcy court. And importantly, one of the requests in that 2004 exam was for a bit-by-bit image of the computers that Mr. Abel and his estranged wife had been using. And as you would expect, there was lots of foot dragging. Many excuses were given to us as to why their computers couldn't be imaged, that it was an ongoing real estate business that couldn't be disrupted, that even on the weekends they had a lot of stuff going on. And I was talked into by someone at Ricoh into trying this Remlox device because it would take away an excuse from them. Because it would be sent to them and they could attach it themselves to the computers. It would be a minimal amount of disruption. And as you would probably also expect, I didn't trust the people we were sending these devices to, so had to be really persuaded that this was worth the effort to do it. And you'll see later on at the end, there was a disruption with one of the collections. We sent, I want to say it was 10 or 11 Remloxes to be attached to 10 or 11 computers in their offices. And at the Ricoh lab in Houston, they got a signal the first night that one of them didn't process correctly, and they were very professional in the way they presented it to me, like it didn't process correctly. So it was sent to, and of course this was the main computer we were interested in, so we sent another one the following day, and you'll see later on that in between that day there was major wiping of the hard drive going on, which we were able to detect with the second Remlox. So just in terms of the procedural steps we took to make sure that we were going to end up with something that we could use in court, I'm sure if there are attorneys on the call, you're familiar with the need to issue litigation hold letters. In this case, we had belts and suspender hold letters going on. It made it absolutely clear we were interested in these computers, involved the defendant's counsel in that, making sure they understood that we really did suspect that stuff was being destroyed and that that's why all the foot dragging was occurring. We asked specifically for bit-by-bit images of all the computer devices, and Dave can weigh in later as to whether there's a better way to say that, but that's what we said at the time. We also made the decision to engage a consultant, and the person we selected was from Ricoh, who had criminal experience. I really wanted someone on board to help advise me. We were operating within a budget, but I thought it was a good investment to have someone advise me as to what I was pretty sure we were going to see, who could help me figure out what we could do short of processing all the data that we were going to get, and who could also help us broker an agreement with the defense attorneys over what was fair game. We agreed to keep everything in escrow, which is obviously critical when you're taking an image of a computer that might include privileged information. We entered into a confidentiality agreement for everything that was included on the devices. Honestly, the most important thing in that, it was your run-of-the-mill confidentiality agreement. The two most important clauses in that agreement were probably a clawback clause that we basically said that if we ended up with anything privileged, they could have it back, that we weren't seeking to get an implicit waiver of the privilege. But we also got an inventory of what they had, and that proved very useful later on at trial. And then probably most important, and this is where Dave Hendershot at Ricoh was so helpful to me, we identified the types of reports that Ricoh could run based on the images that were obtained that didn't involve any processing of the data and didn't actually allow us to see any documents, but did allow us to get a sense of what was happening on these different computers. And we were able to get deleted file listings, and ask yourself how the defense attorneys were going to be in a position to say no to letting us see the deleted file listing. We were able to see active file listings. We were able to get device information reports, which gave us a lot of information about when operating systems were put in, what other software, like wiping programs, was on computers, and when those things were used. So without processing any data, we were able to prove that the debtor and his estranged wife had intentionally spoliated who knows how much data by using a wiping program and by swapping out operating systems at key points. On the deleted file listings, and this just kind of whet our appetite, there were names of files like the debtor's will that had been deleted in the weeks leading up to the imaging. There was a template LLC operating agreement for companies owned by Able. There were lots of names that clearly seemed very interesting and pertinent and relevant to us. But there were also a bunch of Zs, lots and lots of Zs. And when we asked the consultant what he thought it was, he went back and researched and found out that it was an artifact of a wiping program. And because of the information we had from the image, we were able to date the use of the wiping program. And as you might expect, that happened. We were able to show eventually that happened right before the imaging. So in Maryland, and this is probably true in a lot of places, when you've discovered spoliation, you need to act promptly. So instead of going forward with discovery, we promptly filed a motion for sanctions based on spoliation that laid this out all in front of the courts, supported that motion with an affidavit from an expert who was the consultant we had been working with at Ricoh, and detailed the use of CCleaner, this wiping program, the disk reformats that happened at critical moments, and then, as I mentioned before, the names of the files that we knew for a fact had been deleted. Ultimately, the court decided that there needed to be discovery on this and allowed the defendants a chance to bring in their own expert to look at the images and see if we just got it wrong. As it turns out, their expert was probably just as helpful for our case as our own expert was, because the evidence was really irrefutable that the wiping had occurred right at critical moments right before imaging, and that relevant things had been deleted. And when we got that, examined their expert, put on their bookkeeper and various witnesses from within the defendant group, we got into evidence the listings I referred to earlier, the deleted file listings, the device reports. And ultimately, and this did take a while, we had to wait for this, ultimately what we presented to the court was a chronology of what happened and when. And unfortunately, this is probably hard to see on your computer, but later on you might be able to zoom into it. The little yellow ovals represent imaging. The green represent events in court, and these are orders from the court that something either be preserved or imaged or produced to us. And the red is the use of the CCleaner wiping program. And so, for example, you can see in the left cluster there's an imaging that was going to occur on a particular date, and you can see what was happening on the day before. 4 different computers all being wiped with CCleaner. You can see that in the next cluster to the right of the slide. Again, you've got orders from the court that something happened, and you've got a whole bunch of wiping and disks being reformatted right before the imaging that happens at the bottom. And if you look at the very lower right-hand corner, you can see an extra imaging at the end. That was the extra Remlox that we had to send to the wife of the debtor. I think I mentioned earlier that the first time we tried to image it, she tried to stop it from imaging. She tried to do something, and right away the Houston lab got a report that something was wrong. So we sent the Remlox to replace the first one, and you see that she used the wiping program in between before it was imaged the following day. So we were able to present a pretty compelling case, and I'm well aware that we had better facts than you're going to have in most cases. But ultimately, the court granted our motion for sanctions and gave us the ultimate sanction, which was a default judgment against the defendants, which allowed us to pull back into the state all the real estate they had been titling in others' names. At this point, we're well over $8 million in real estate that's been brought back into the estate, and still finding additional things. So that's our story and our experience of using the Remlox.
Jean, thank you. Love the timeline as well, and I know it's pretty hard to see on the screen, but if anybody would like to see a copy of that afterwards, we'd be happy to share. And what a great strategy you adopted there. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. I have a question from the audience. One of our listeners wants to know, just as a matter of curiosity, if you had also gotten a 502 order when you put your clawback into effect.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mary. Can you repeat the question? I heard 502 order, but didn't hear the part right before that.
Oh, the part before that was the listener is just curious if you employed a 502 clawback in order to get that agreement on the privilege.
We used, we have a template here in Maryland, and I can send the template language that we use that the court has basically blessed here. It's very similar to that. But the idea is, it's an agreement that the purpose of this is not to get privileged information, but we don't want to delay everybody by having to process everything, go through that expense, and then remove the privileged information. We never got to processing anything, so there was no need to ever do any sort of privilege review or exercise the clawback. But I'm fairly certain that language is fairly similar to what would be in 502 or used in any jurisdiction across the country. Basically protects people, but allows you to go ahead and get the image.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. David?
Thank you. Great story, Jean. Thanks for sharing. So we've shown how data collection is critically important. Jean went through a great example of that. I'm sure we all have our own examples. But Remlox was invented and being used for almost 10 years now. And we found that as things move on, we have to bring new technologies to the market as well. So there were some further FRCP amendments, as there always are, and came out with a larger focus on proportionality. So we said, okay, in some cases we just don't need to collect a full forensic image. Some cases we just need to collect the types of documents that are potentially relevant. So we created Remlox Cloud, and this is what we're launching at Legal Tech next week. And I'd encourage people to come to our booth or come to our private demo room and have a look at it. But essentially, Remlox Cloud creates a forensic image, not a full forensic image anymore, of course, but a forensic image, so as the validation processes that you would want, of only requested file types. So essentially, it's a target collection tool. The file types are not defined by file extension, or you could request that, but typically it's defined by file type based on the signature of the file. So that if somebody, by example, maybe had a financial fraud investigation and you're interested in spreadsheets, and somebody renames the spreadsheet to Windows.386, if you just used file types of Excel, that wouldn't be collected. But as we use in the digital signature of a file to collect it, that would be collected and actually flagged as a file of interest because the naming didn't match the type of file. It's deployed by email, interestingly. Basically, a user would request, hey, I have perhaps 10 people all over the world or all over the country, and this are the types of files that we want to collect from them. And typically you're going to find that's Office documents, it's PDFs, it's email containers, of course, and what have you. In some cases, it might be, here's some QuickBooks to collect. There's CAD drawings. There's, something specific to your case. But rather than collect everything, there's a deployment. It's sent to the custodian by email, and those choices are preset at the deployment. So by the time the email comes, it's already customized, knowing what's going to be collected. The user clicks the link from the deployment email, and the collection starts. When it's deployed, there's also the opportunity to have an attachment. Perhaps there's a document from General Counsel's office or from the law firm. Of course, in this day and age, people are worried about spear phishing attacks, so there can be some information in the body of the email or in an attachment saying, to validate this, you can call this number and speak to this person or somebody that you know, so to ease a custodian's fears of, doing the things that we tell them not to. Don't click on something you don't know who it's from. And once they click it, the deployment starts, the collection starts, and it creates forensic validation reports, audit trails, and hash values. Of course, preserves the metadata, which is critically important, and it encrypts the collection, and then it will move that data securely uploaded to our Azure environment. Obviously, the encryption at rest, inter-application encryption there. We have a FedRAMP environment for government collections as well. So it moves it into there. So it's encrypted at source, it's encrypted in transit, and it's encrypted as it sits in our Azure environment. So some features around this, same-day deployments. So the collection can begin as soon as the user opens their email. Or they could, in some cases, during beta testing, we found that some people would rather just do it at the end of the day as they walk out of the office to click the link, to lock the computer, and go. And, of course, we get asked a lot, how long does the collection take? Well, I guess it depends on a couple of things. It depends on how many file types you're trying to collect and how many of those file types appear on the system. So what's interesting is once the image is collected and encrypted, there's several things that you could do with it. Of course, like a lot of collections, you could just preserve it for a future time. Maybe you're doing a collection as part of a preservation, or maybe you're collecting it to have yourself ready for the next steps. It could be downloaded for in-house processing as well, or storage. You could leave it in the secure cloud, or you could download it. I know some people like to process in-house, and the image format is processable by just about every eDiscovery processing tool. Or you could store it locally. That's one option. What we found is a really interesting option is it can be configured to automatically process it. So for ECA, for review, and actually production, using tools like our Ricoh on-demand tool, which is an on-demand self-service tool. So in theory, you could collect in the morning, process the data once it's uploaded and be doing a review and actually at production in the evening. Now, nobody wants to have fire drills, and we all like to be more organized, but of course we all work in this area where we know that doesn't always happen, right? Things pop up that we didn't expect and didn't anticipate, and then we have this fire drill. So I think there's some really interesting use cases there. And like I said, this is really a new tool as we bring new tools to market and be innovative using the patented technology of Remlox, yet being observant of the industry as it is today and as it's going to be. The ability to process all the way through and to review and actually production very quickly. And also, with the proportionality. Of course, Remlox it still exists and will continue to be successful, and in cases where you need a complete forensic image. But Remlox Cloud, as you can see by this side-by-side comparison, Remlox Cloud certainly gives you some flexibility and allows you maybe to react to something that you weren't planning to. And also for firms and corporations that don't have big infrastructure, being able to collect and process it through Ricoh on demand, which is truly on demand, no contract terms. It's really as and when you need it, with all the security you'd expect in the Azure environment, encryption at rest, inter-application encryption, and so on. We've been developing this from concept to now is almost 2 years. We've been through a lot of testing, more recently a lot of beta testing, and just getting this right for the marketplace. So we're excited about it. We're very pleased to be showing this off next week at Legal Tech. We're at booth 518. We do have an event going on Friday as well. I think Mary mentioned we have a Twitter takeover. So if you want to know more about Remlox and how it can help your data collection or ask questions, Friday at 12 till 1 Eastern, and just look for the hashtag Remlox Takeover. We're really excited about it. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm sure Jean is happy to answer any questions as well that we have at this stage, Mary.
Oh, this is fantastic. We do have questions. So for you, David, is there any ability to perform imaging like this on iOS or other mobile platforms?
Yeah, that's a great question. That is certainly on our roadmap. One of the challenges with any mobile devices is, the speed at which they change. I think there is over 100 different cellular devices available in the U.S. at the moment to buy new or on the gray market, and various versions of those, various versions of the operating systems. So we are looking at how, and this has been a challenge I think for a lot of organizations, how do you collect data remotely from iOS devices? We do have a methodology right now, which is outside of this, and be happy to speak to anybody offline on the best way to do that. But could we do this for iPads and iOS and other devices, frankly? It's certainly something that our development team will be looking at and to establish if this is something we can put on our technology roadmap. It is, of course, an industry challenge, and I think as we've shown in the past, we're not scared to take on the challenge and really find out if we can provide a viable solution for our client bases and move the industry forward.
Excellent. Thanks, David. And Jean, we've got one of our government attendees asking for a copy of the template language relating to 502/clawback that you were describing a little earlier. So if there are others who'd like something like that, Jean, if you're willing to share?
Sure, that's not a problem.
Okay, so others of you who would like that, if you just let us know, we'll make sure that you get a copy of that. And then we have another question. This one's for you, David. Does Remlox Cloud have a silent collection capability? I'm assuming they're talking about like what you used to do with the black bag at midnight, sort of going into a company, but so you're going from afar.
Yeah, that's a great question, and actually it was something that we considered during technology development. So no, it doesn't. This is very overt as opposed to covert. But we do have different solutions if somebody has that challenge. I'd encourage them to reach out, and there are some alternate ways of doing that.
Okay, very good. And then we have another question. I think it may be one that you'll want the listener to contact you about startup eDiscovery small businesses. Can they use this tool as well?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I congratulate somebody for being a startup business in the e-discovery industry at this time, and we always have strategic partnerships. So I think you're right. I'd encourage the person who asked the question to reach out afterwards and have a discussion about that.
Very good, very good. And, David, we got a question on 902. When you were developing Remlox, did you take into account the new federal rules of evidence and the whole hash validation and qualified person and things like that?
Well, what a great question, and I should have mentioned this. As part of the amendments to Federal Rule of Evidence 902, there are some changes on how we present or validate evidence and introduce it. One of the reports that comes out of Remlox Cloud provides the documentation for a client to take to under 902 to be able to validate the process. So this is an automatically generated report. It could be going to an affidavit format. I still think there's some question on what courts they expect. There's a lot of people thinking there should be affidavits or expert testimony statements, and some people think it should just be a log file. So the report that comes out of this, we can give to a client, and they'll automatically get it actually, which will validate the collection, validate the methodology. Obviously, have hash values of before and after the collection, and they will match, and they'll be able to take that as part of complying with the new 902 amendments. It's a great question, and I should have mentioned that.
No, that's excellent. I think the automation around that is just wonderful. So we have a question. If you could go back to the slide that compares Remlox and Remlox Cloud again, and if you could just maybe reiterate the difference between the two products is what
Absolutely.
One of our listeners would like.
Absolutely. So the complete forensic collection of Remlox originally, and I think we kind of touched on the background and why we did that and the benefits of that. So that is a full forensic image. If you remember, we had a slide about the differences between a forensic image and a full forensic image. We can make a forensic image of any piece of data or network drive or really even half of a file, should that be required. But Remlox, the original Remlox tool, does absolutely make a complete forensic image. We don't contemplate that Remlox Cloud should do that, although with a little bit of code change, we could make that happen. But then you really time the user up. If you need a full forensic image, because in Gene's case, they had some purpose for that, that's still the way to go. Remlox Cloud is designed to be targeted. It's designed that you know enough about your preservation obligations, you know enough about your case, and maybe you've had a meet and confer and you've agreed with your adversaries that this is the type of data you want to collect. This is a great fit for that. There are still some shipping options available, but the cloud is quicker, it's scalable, it's got more security around it, I think, as we all know now. There's no advanced technical knowledge required for either of the solutions. We do have experts that can answer any questions, but to be honest with you, it's fairly straightforward, and for this audience who deal with this on a daily basis, they'll appreciate that. And the forensic validation processes, if you remember, we had a slide that said these are the things that we have to comply with when we're looking at validating evidence. That's consistent against both of them. Of course, hash values is something we all know about and we all love and we've had in place for many years. With 902, one of the changes of FRE 902 was that there are alternate methods to hash values as well. So by example, if you have a file in use, or if you're collecting something that's constantly changing, your hash values are not going to match. And the courts have recognized that, so the validation process behind this complies with that as well. So hash values are not the only way of validating evidence. They're certainly a good tried and tested way. They both deployed remotely. Remlox is deployed from our lab. It's a physical deployment. We have those encrypted drives, if you remember the slide we showed with that on it, and that's shipped out by courier with return shipping, prepaid shipping enclosed, and that will arrive next day pretty much anywhere around the world. As I think I mentioned, we've used this in 37 countries so far, and very, very successfully. Remlox Cloud is also deployed remotely, and we deploy in a cloud environment. We have some users who are asking if they can deploy it themselves, so we're going to probably create a new interface for them. But currently it's deployed by a forensic expert. He'll have the criteria that's been given to him, maybe an attachment, maybe some verbiage for the body of the email, and obviously the file types that need to be collected. And that can be done the same day. And it's kind of interesting that, like I said, nobody wants the fire drill where they get to Saturday morning and realize they have a deposition on Monday and they haven't collected the documents yet. Nobody wants to get to that. However, if you do find yourself in that position, Remlox Cloud could certainly be deployed, and you could go through using other tools like Ricoh On Demand and go through into review. You could review it in Ricoh On Demand, or you could automate it to review in your review tool of choice. And Ricoh have several options there. So the main difference is targeted and same-day collections. And just think about your case. Do we need a full forensic image? Are we going to have to look at, do we have the ability to recover deleted files? In Jean's case, simply just pulling off reports about activity really helped her with her great strategy to get to her end goal without processing 11 or 12 full hard drives, and obviously there's cost and time associated with that. So I think that kind of covers the main differences. Does that make sense, Mary?
It sure does, and you bring up another question that we have about the demonstrative evidence, Jean, that you used to support your sanctions motion that was so successful. Can you talk a little bit about the process that you went through to design that timeline? It's quite compelling.
Well, as I said, we had great facts to work with, so that's part of it. But I mean, the other thing is, it was just keeping it simple and just presenting it in a chronological way. I'm sorry that let's see if I can get to the slide here. I'm sorry that it's hard to read there, but the way we presented it is by just it was kind of a summary of what evidence we had shown to the court. This was a bench trial. And so we just kind of went through each thing, and with each little oval, we were able to tell the court what it was, pull it up. And it was just kind of like the cumulative impact of that. And part of what we needed to show in order to get terminating sanctions was that this wasn't just negligence, that it was beyond negligence, and the timing was obviously very helpful to proving that. And so that's why we decided to stick with a straight chronology and pick simple colors. I mean, that's basically it. Nothing fancy there.
Yeah, well, for those who are listening, this particular piece of demonstrative evidence for me is one of the first very compelling pieces for intent to deprive, because it demonstrates right before a collection event that there was wiping activity fairly consistently. So as you said, you had great facts, but also you assembled those facts in a very compelling story. So thank you for that, Jean.
Sure, thank you.
Let's see. We have a question about is there any material that you can direct people to, David, to read about the Remlox Cloud? Is it on the Ricoh website?
Well, absolutely. Because it's being released next week, what I'd like to do is for people who have attended this, certainly send them some additional information that they can look at, and encourage them to come by our booth at Legal Tech and maybe come by our private demo suite and look at it, look at working. We look at slides and we look at the principles behind it. That's great, and maybe look at how it's actually going to function and the user experience. And we'd encourage people to do that. But we'll certainly send people, attendees to this webinar after this event. We'll certainly send them some more information, and would love them to come and see us at Legal Tech.
That's right. That's right. And everybody who's going to be in New York should definitely reach out to David. Now we have another question. I'm not sure if it's for you, David, or for you, Gene, but someone else is quite curious about the timeline. And what program did you use to create and prepare the timeline?
That was West Timeline.
Did you say West?
Yeah, West, W-E-S-T.
Okay, very good. Very good. We have another question. Does Remlox provide collection or preservation platform for legacy tapes?
Interesting question. It doesn't, is the short answer, and the reality is it's probably not going to do in the future. I think it's interesting that we're seeing, I think a case is 15 years ago we had masses of tapes, and we really just don't see a lot of that anymore. We find that when old legacy tapes become part of a preservation request, that typically there's some conversion required, or certainly duplication in a lab environment, and then some extraction and potentially some conversion. But we see less and less of that now. We see more organizations, as you'd expect, doing backups to spindles and hard drives and solid-state drives in some cases. But no, I think that's a lab job. I think the process would be a forensically validated duplication, and then working with the image, extracting the data from that, and it depends on what the system is, but invariably there's probably going to be a conversion style of requirement.
Very good. Very good. You can see David's contact information there, and the Twitter takeover is going to be on Friday at 12 Eastern, and the hashtag Remlox Takeover, R-E-M-L-O-X Takeover. Kaylee Wallstead and I will definitely be part of that, David, so watch out and buckle your seatbelt, boy. The Twitter chats come at you kind of quick. And then we also want to invite everybody to, David, what is the number of your booth again?
It's 518. We're in booth 518, and like I said, we have a private demo suite as well, or maybe somewhere you can just sit and have a more quiet conversation just around the corner. So we'd welcome people to come by.
Excellent. We've got your contact information up on the screen, and then we also have Gene's contact information for those of you who wanted to reach out for the order around clawback and things of that nature, and probably on that timeline, because that is very, very eye-catching. So I want to thank you, David and Gene, for a wonderful webinar. We'll be sending out a link to the recording and the slides a little bit later. We welcome your participation in Legal Tech. ACEDS has several events. If you go to aceds.org, we've got one of our events is on a wait list, but sign up anyway, because as space becomes available, we'll give you a call and get you in that room. And the Thomson Reuters event with the judges, the Back to the Future event, is open for registration as well, and is fast approaching a waiting list on that. Our booth is 1601. We are going to have some special events and special guests in the booth, and so you can expect to see some very some very excited eDiscovery rock stars at our booth periodically, and we'll be tweeting out the day's activity and who will be in the booth and all of that. So those of you who are on the line that would like to be entered into the drawing for the SEDS package. Make sure you attend tomorrow and Thursdays as well, and you'll be entered into that drawing. So as always, we appreciate so much our affiliates like Ricoh and our supporters and champions like David, who bring to us not only the material that we need to stay technically competent, but also bring resources like Gene Lewis, who is using eDiscovery to win cases and to give our community a bird's eye view of what works, what doesn't work, what's successful, and to help us elevate our practice to better serve our clients and better serve the cause of justice. So thank you so much for attending our webinar and listening and being so attentive and curious with your questions. And we look forward to seeing you on the next webinar and in person, in real life, next week. Thank you.